New reporting today from the Associated Press provides one of the clearest, most dystopian looks yet at the way the conservatives are operationalizing their efforts to have the table all set for Donald Trump on day one for a ruthless second term. It has to do with a guy named Tom Jones. No, not that Tom Jones, a different Tom Jones. This one, a seasoned political operative leading the American Accountability Foundation. From the comfort of his home office in Kentucky, Jones is working to identify and expose federal employees suspected by him of being, quote, hostile to Donald Trump's policies. The AP reports that he is digging through the, quote, backgrounds, social media posts, and commentary of key high-ranking government employees, starting with the Department of Homeland Security. They're relying in part on tips from Tom Jones's network of conservative contacts, including workers. In a move that alarms some, they're preparing to publish the findings online. It won't surprise you to discover that the money behind this effort is a $100,000 grant from the Heritage Foundation, the authors of, you guessed it, Project 2025. That plan of action, which Democrats call a far-right manifesto, includes sections on mass deportations and federal limits on reproductive rights. But its crown jewel is a promise to reclassify tens of thousands of federal workers who could be fired for not adequately towing the line and supporting President Trump's second-term agenda. The man who's been called an architect of Project 2025, Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts, spoke to our colleagues on MSNBC's The Weekend.
I suspect a lot of those people you're talking about have been in the federal service for a long time and have served not just Republican administrations, but also Democratic administrations, et cetera.
They have. And 95% of them who give political contributions give them to the Democratic Party. I reject out of hand, Michael, that somehow
you're going to fire someone because they wrote a check to a Democratic candidate?
No, we're going to fire someone, and the number needs to be more than 50,000, considering that there are more than 2 million federal employees. Because over the last century, the radical left has seen the administrative state as the fourth branch of government.
Joining us now, senior correspondent at Vox, Ian Millhiser. He is here at Basil Smikle, also back. Finally caught his breath after that brilliant piece. That was an epic analysis on abortion politics. So we're waiting for another one from you, Basil, when we get to this topic. Ian, talk to me about this American Accountability Foundation. Just from I gave the basics of it, but this doesn't sound so much like a foundation as it sounds like a vigilante, one dude, or maybe there's more to it than that. But talk about like what the scope of this effort. The image of a guy sitting working on his computer in Kentucky is a little scary, can be, depending on how malicious it is, but the bankroll here is not nothing.
Yeah, I mean, if you told me there's just one guy with a $100,000 grant looking for government employees he doesn't like, I wouldn't be too worried. The problem is that this is part of a much broader effort, not just to identify government employees who may be hostile to the Trump administration or a hypothetical second Trump administration, but to burrow down into the government, to take jobs that historically have been held by civil servants and turn them into political jobs. And you know, I never thought I'd say this, but I miss conservatism. Like, I miss the idea that we should try to keep things the way they are and not make huge sweeping changes just for the sake of disrupting things. The idea that civil servants should be protected from political influence, you know, the first law establishing that was signed by Chester A. Arthur. And for people who don't remember Chester A. Arthur, he was president in the 1880s. This is a very old idea. It's a very good idea. It ensures that the government continues to operate and doesn't swing wildly back and forth based on who is in authority. And gosh, I just wish that everything wasn't on the table right now.
Basil, I'm going to read to you a little bit more from this AP piece, just so you get a little bit better picture of what we're talking about here. Conservative-backed group creating a list of federal employees it suspects could resist Trump plans. Anytime people get into the business of list making, it makes some among us kind of nervous. Here's what it says. With 6 researchers, Jones's team operates remotely across the country, poring over the information about federal workers within Homeland Security, the State Department, and other agencies that deal with immigration and border issues. Their focus is on the highest ranks of the civil servants, GS 13 13, 14, and 15 employees and those in senior executive positions who could put up roadblocks to Trump's plans for tighter borders and more deportations. Quote, I think it's important to the next administration to understand who those people are. He dismissed the risks that could be involved in publicly posting the names, salary information, and other details of federal workers who have some level of privacy, or the idea that his works group could put employees' livelihoods in jeopardy. Quote, you don't get to make policy and then say, hey, don't scrutinize me. Now, I think someone should have a little discussion with Tom Jones about what the civil service does, because make policy is not really supposed to be their bailiwick. But talk a little bit here about the politics of this and whether this is, I mean, it's obviously a disturbing trend, and we'll talk about the Heritage Plan, the 2025 plan in a second. But talk a little bit about how much damage you think a band of list makers like this in today's day and age could do.
Yeah, I love the Chester Arthur reference, because there was a time in our country where patronage jobs were the sort of coin of the realm for the federal government, oddly enough, in the post office. But over time, you know, federal administrators, the president himself, over time realized that, you know, we need to have a more professional government. And therefore, you had civil servants, civil workers who were good at their job and wanted to be public servants that said they wanted to go in government. And you had a whole host of people charged with not just being in that sort of federal service corps, but overseeing their work to make sure that they weren't, that they were still working in the public interest. And what I always tell people is that even if initially the president constitutionally or otherwise was not given a lot of power, the presidency has a tremendous amount of power because of the massive bureaucracy that they oversee. When you think about the hundreds of thousands of jobs that the president can, where the president can appoint individuals, you know, this is a complete reshaping of the goal of the Heritage Foundation's plan is to completely reshape government. They just don't want to take back government. They want to reshape it, reclaim it, and craft it in such a way that doesn't look anything like what we know today. And that is incredibly scary because the guardrails are off. The oversight is off. And it really does become a matter of political ideology. And for so long in our history, we've fought against that to make sure that the people who have these jobs can actually do them well and do them in service of the people in this country.
Do we have time, Pat, to play a little sound here, or do we have to get to break? Okay, we're going to play a little sound here because, look, the Heritage Foundation.
After Lisa Monaco, Merrick Garland, the senior members.
That sound just came right flying in there without me even having a chance to set it up. So I'm going to set it up real quick. Heritage Foundation 2025 plan, it's like, it's bad, but it's all on paper. You got to see the face of it, like what it could really be if you're on one of these lists. What's going to happen to you if you're on one of these lists? Here's Steve Bannon.
We're coming after Lisa Monaco, Merrick Garland, the senior members of DOJ that have prosecuted President Trump, Jack Smith. And this is not about vengeance. This is not about revenge. This is not about retribution. This is about saving this republic. We're going to use the Constitution. Let me tell the people that have done that to President Trump, whether you're in the federal government or whether you're down in the state of Georgia or you're in Arizona or you're in Michigan, we are going to go and we're going to get every single receipt. And to the fullest extension of the law, you are going to be investigated, prosecuted, and incarcerated, okay?
Ian, I'll say that's a man who's making a list and checking it twice and not in the best way. It's a list that I believe a number of people at this network, including me, are on. So, I ask you, when you hear somebody say this is not about vengeance, it's not about revenge, it's not about retribution, I usually think whenever anybody has to say those things, it's usually exactly what it's about: vengeance, revenge, and retribution. How much danger would federal civil servants be armed with the lists we've been talking about when you put them in the hands of someone like Steve Bannon?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's important to understand we're not just talking about government employees in danger. You know, Steve Bannon was talking about getting more political oversight and more political control of the Department of Justice, the department that brings prosecutions. So he was talking about, you know, getting a Department of Justice, and there's historically been an extraordinary amount of insulation between DOJ and the White House because you don't want DOJ making prosecutorial decisions based on, are you a friend of the president? Are you an enemy of the president? So anything about DOJ should scare the bejesus out of you. But even if we are just talking about other government agencies, the reason why civil service protections exist is that the law means something. It's so, you know, Barack Obama signs Obamacare, and if the next president doesn't like Obamacare, there's still civil servants in office pushing out the checks that are authorized by Obamacare. You know, if someone else becomes president, the post office doesn't say, we're only going to deliver mail to Republicans now. The idea is that whatever Congress has said the law is, you want people in government who will continue to apply the law and continue to do what the law requires until a new law is signed.
Listen, the whole thing spooks me, scares me. And there was once upon a time when we all knew that there were civil servants who had political opinions. Sometimes they agreed with the administration, sometimes they disagreed. It didn't matter because their job was to execute the policies that were placed on their desks. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how it basically works. All these other things are perversions of that. Ian, thank you. Basil, thank you. Oh, wait, you're not.